Awaken your spirit chosen ones. God does not announce when the test is over. He changes how he treats you. That's the part no one prepares you for. Not the struggle, not the waiting, not even the pain, but the sudden shift in how heaven responds. One day you're praying hard, fighting for signs, begging for clarity. Then without warning, the noise stops. No alarms, no dramatic reveal. Just a quiet, unsettling realization that things are different now. Not easier, just different. Here's a fact most people never hear. Throughout scripture and history, the final stages of spiritual testing were rarely marked by miracles. They were marked by responsibility. Moses didn't get more signs when leadership became real. Joseph didn't get explanations when authority arrived. The training wheels came off, and heaven stepped back. Not because God left, but because trust had been established. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Passing the final test doesn't feel like winning. It feels like being handed the bill, the keys, and the silence all at once. God's reaction isn't fireworks, it's expectation. You notice you're no longer being rescued from your own choices. You're not getting emotional cushioning. You're not being chased down by correction. Heaven isn't hovering anymore, it's observing. There's also a strange humor to it, if you're honest. You spend years asking God to elevate you, only to realize elevation comes with less hand-holding and more accountability. You asked for strength, and God answered by trusting you to stand without reminders. It's like finally being allowed to cook in the kitchen, then realizing no one is coming to clean the mess but you. This is the moment many people misinterpret as abandonment, burnout, or spiritual dryness. But it's none of that. It's the aftershock of passing. The stage where God's silence isn't absence, it's approval. And once you understand that, everything you thought you knew about being chosen changes permanently. Number one, God stops correcting you because you now correct yourself. There comes a moment when the constant inner warnings, sharp convictions, and unmistakable nudges quietly fade. Not because you've drifted off course, but because you finally learned how to stay on it without being chased. Early on, correction is loud. It has to be. You ignore instincts, override conscience, and explain away red flags. So God intervenes through discomfort, delays, closed doors, and that heavy feeling you can't shake. Correction is external because discipline hasn't yet taken root, but the final test changes that. The shift is subtle and unsettling. You notice you don't need to be stopped as often. You pause before reacting. You feel the weight of a decision before making it. You walk away from things that once pulled you in, not out of fear, but clarity. That's not luck or maturity by age. That's internal alignment. The work moved inside. God's reaction is not applause, it's distance. Not the cold kind, but the respectful kind. Like a teacher who stops hovering once the student no longer cheats themselves. Heaven steps back because it no longer needs to interrupt. You've learned to catch yourself mid-thought, mid-tone, mid-choice. You correct your attitude before it hardens. You adjust your direction before damage is done. This is where many people panic. They think something is wrong because they don't feel constantly checked anymore. They mistake stability for spiritual decline. But constant correction was never the goal. Transformation was. When obedience becomes instinctive, correction becomes unnecessary. This level is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. You can't blame ignorance anymore. You can't say you didn't know better. You did, and you chose better. That's the point. God isn't micromanaging you because you're no longer careless with yourself. Passing this test means you've developed a moral spine. You don't need to be threatened with consequences to do what's right. You don't need pressure to stay aligned. Integrity has become automatic, not performative. God's silence here is not indifference, it's confidence. He's not correcting because there's nothing to interrupt. You've learned to stop yourself. And that's when trust quietly replaces training. Number 2, what once felt like resistance was God watching your decision-making process. There was a season when everything felt harder than it needed to be. Doors didn't open smoothly. Plans stalled without clear reasons. Progress came with friction, not flow. At the time, it felt like resistance, like something unseen was slowing you down on purpose. But the struggle wasn't the test. Your choices inside that pressure were. God wasn't blocking you to frustrate you. He was watching how you moved when momentum was removed. Anyone can act wisely when things are easy. Anyone can sound faithful when the path is clear. The real measure comes when there's no signal telling you what to do next, when effort doesn't immediately reward you, and when patience costs more than impatience. In those moments, God observed patterns. Did you rush to force outcomes, or did you slow yourself down? Did you compromise small values to gain speed, or did you accept delay without bending? Did you panic and overcorrect, or did you stay steady even when progress looked unimpressive? Resistance revealed how you make decisions when clarity is absent. This is why the pressure lingered longer than expected. Not because God was undecided, but because consistency had to be proven. A single good choice doesn't build trust. Repeated alignment does. Heaven wasn't counting your prayers. It was weighing your reactions. That season also stripped away performance. When resistance stays, pretending becomes exhausting. You stop trying to look spiritual and start being honest. You confront impatience. You notice shortcuts you used to justify. You realize how often you moved out of fear instead of wisdom. That awareness was part of the test. Passing didn't mean you got everything right. It meant you learned. Your decisions became slower, cleaner, less emotional. You stopped reacting to pressure and started responding with intention. The resistance didn't disappear because you fought harder. It lifted because you matured. When movement returns after that, it feels different. There's less chaos, less second-guessing. Not because the path is safer, but because your judgment is stronger. God isn't removing resistance as a reward. He's removing it because it's no longer needed. The process did its job. Number 3, you are no longer shielded from consequences because you're ready to handle them. There comes a point in your journey when life stops buffering you. Mistakes, missteps, and wrong turns no longer come with an invisible safety net. The gentle hand that once softened outcomes, the invisible shield that caught you before disaster struck, slowly fades away. It isn't punishment, it's recognition. You are no longer a beginner. You've grown strong enough to face results head-on. Early on, consequences are tempered. You fall, but someone or something saves you. You fail, but a delay, a warning, or an external factor keeps the damage minimal. Heaven protects you because the weight is too heavy to bear yet. But passing the final test changes that. The shield lifts because trust has been established. You are now accountable, and life's full force is allowed to meet your decisions. This stage is shocking at first. The world seems harsher, and suddenly every choice feels amplified. You notice that careless words carry weight. Unchecked actions leave marks. Opportunities are no longer forgiving. But that intensity is exactly the point. God doesn't remove protection to punish. It's to prepare you for influence. A person who can't handle consequence can't handle authority, impact, or responsibility. The shift is subtle, yet profound. You find that you adapt. You calculate more. You pause longer before acting. You measure risks with real awareness. Where once you were impulsive or dependent on correction, you now carry foresight as your guide. You no longer need someone constantly stepping in to prevent failure, because failure itself becomes a teacher rather than a threat. This is what makes the final test so different from everything before. It's not about obedience under supervision. It's about integrity under exposure, God allows this because strength isn't proven in comfort. It's proven in accountability. You've been trained, refined, and prepared. Now the world tests your readiness, and your ability to stand firm without intervention proves that you've truly passed. The shield is gone, and you are trusted to carry yourself through unbroken. Number 4, God removes emotional cushioning so truth can land fully. For most of your journey, life softens the blows. Pain comes wrapped in distraction. Lessons arrive disguised in comfort. Even failures carry excuses, and disappointment is often buffered so it doesn't hit too hard. God allows this because early learning is fragile. Too much truth too fast, and you might break. But passing the final test changes the rules entirely. Suddenly the cushioning is gone, and every lesson lands with full weight. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. When the buffer disappears, you're forced to confront reality exactly as it is. No sugarcoating, no gentle edges, no convenient loopholes. Relationships show their true colors. Decisions reveal their real consequences. Your strengths and weaknesses are no longer partially hidden. They are raw, exposed, undeniable. The moment is uncomfortable, sometimes harsh, but it is necessary. Softened truth breeds dependence. Uncushioned truth breeds discernment. This stage of life is where your internal compass becomes non-negotiable. You can't rely on feelings, temporary relief, or outside validation to guide you. When emotions are stripped back, choices are made purely on principle, not on comfort or fear. You act because you know what is right, not because it's easy or pleasant. God's removal of cushioning forces you to separate what matters from what feels good. Interestingly, the process often comes with a strange kind of freedom. Once you feel the full weight of truth without interference, you stop avoiding reality. You stop clinging to illusions. You see patterns clearly, accept responsibility fully, and begin to make decisions with rare precision. You learn that discomfort is not a punishment. It's the most honest mirror of growth. By the time this stage settles, you are unshakable. You no longer run from truth or seek soft exits. God's reaction may seem quiet or even indifferent, but it is profound. He trusts you to stand in reality, carry the lessons, and move forward without needing the emotional training wheels that once protected you. This is the hallmark of maturity, of someone who has truly passed the final test. Number 5, you're trusted with outcomes, not just intentions. In the early stages of growth, God often measures effort more than results. Good intentions, honest prayers, and pure motives carry a lot of weight because the habit of follow-through is still forming. You're learning, fumbling, and testing boundaries. But passing the final test is a whole new level. At this point, intentions aren't enough. God begins to watch outcomes because He's no longer molding your heart. He's watching the results of your choices. This stage is striking because it removes the comfort of, "I meant well." You can't hide behind good intentions anymore. You can't hope that moral effort or spiritual desire will excuse mistakes. What matters now is what actually happens because of your actions. Did your patience produce peace or only delay chaos? Did your courage change your environment or just make you feel brave? Did your discernment protect people and opportunities, or did it merely protect your ego? Outcomes are now the true measure of growth. The shift is unsettling but essential. Intentions are easy to fake. You can appear righteous in thought while failing in action. Outcomes, however, cannot lie. They expose hidden gaps in wisdom, strength, and character. God watches not to punish, but to ensure that your internal growth has matured into external impact. You are being prepared to carry real responsibility, where consequences matter, influence matters, and your decisions shape more than just your own life. This is where you realize the weight of trust. Passing the test doesn't mean everything will go perfectly. It means you are equipped to face imperfection and still produce results that honor your calling. It's about reliability under pressure, integrity when no one is watching, and consistency when the stakes are high. You can no longer rely on hope alone. Being trusted with outcomes transforms how you live. You move differently, think differently, and act differently. God's reaction is no longer hands-on guidance at every turn. It's observation of maturity and motion. You're no longer a student of life. You are a steward, responsible for the results of every choice. And that trust is the clearest sign you have passed the final test. Number 6, God allows people to misunderstand you on purpose. At some point in your journey, you'll notice something unsettling. The people around you start getting it wrong. Friends, colleagues, even family. They misread your actions, twist your words, or judge your choices unfairly. At first, it feels like betrayal or bad luck, but passing the final test changes the perspective. God allows misunderstanding intentionally. It's a filter, a test, and a teacher all at once. The purpose isn't cruelty, it's refinement. Misunderstanding separates the performative from the authentic. When everyone agrees with you, it's easy to be influenced by approval. When people misjudge you, you're forced to stand firm in your own discernment, independent of external validation. God watches not only how you handle success, but how you carry integrity when the world refuses to see it. Your reaction in these moments reveals whether your character is genuine or conditional. This phase also tests patience and emotional control. Misunderstandings provoke anger, frustration, and the urge to defend yourself aggressively. Passing the test requires resisting that urge. You begin to recognize that your role isn't to explain, justify, or argue with every misperception. Your focus becomes alignment with truth, not with perception. God values your restraint over your explanation. Interestingly, this stage often strengthens your influence. Ironically, those who misunderstand you may eventually witness your consistency and integrity, and their perspective changes, but only after your character proves unshakable. God isn't hurrying the revelation. He's letting it unfold naturally, ensuring that your growth is authentic and not dependent on recognition. By allowing misinterpretation, God also reveals your capacity for wisdom. You learn to act from principle, not applause. You learn that real leadership, real spiritual maturity, thrives even in isolation from understanding or support. Misunderstanding becomes a mirror, reflecting your inner stability and revealing who you truly are when nobody else gets it. Passing this test means you can walk through the world misunderstood, yet unshaken. God's silence here is a nod of confidence, not neglect. Your integrity doesn't need validation anymore. It stands firm because it's rooted in truth, not in perception. Number 7, the test ends when obedience no longer needs applause. There comes a stage where the noise of approval fades, and suddenly it doesn't matter anymore. Every pat on the back, every nod of recognition, every well done, they no longer drive your choices. This is a pivotal moment in passing the final test. God isn't looking for visible acts of faith anymore. He's looking for consistency in the unseen, for integrity when nobody is watching, for obedience that exists independently of validation. Early on, encouragement is essential. It keeps you motivated, confirms you're on the right path, and teaches you what right action feels like. But dependence on applause is fragile. When your obedience is tied to recognition, your growth is conditional. The final test strips that away. You discover that doing what's right isn't always rewarded. Sometimes it's lonely, thankless, and even misunderstood. And that's exactly the point. When you reach this stage, obedience becomes instinctive. You no longer calculate the applause you might receive. You no longer act to look good or gain favor. Your actions are purely a reflection of principle and alignment with truth. God allows this because He's testing whether your discipline is authentic. Can you act rightly simply because it is right? Can you endure discomfort without seeking approval? Can you persist in doing good when the world neither notices nor cares? This is also where leadership and influence are forged. People who can operate without applause develop a quiet authority. They don't rely on fans or followers, they carry conviction. Their consistency becomes magnetic because it is self-sustained. The weight of their choices, the soundness of their decisions, and the steadiness of their character are undeniable, not because others have validated them, but because they have proven themselves internally. Passing this test is liberating and demanding at the same time. It removes the crutch of external approval and hands you full ownership of your actions. God's silence here is confirmation. He's no longer monitoring for compliance with applause. He's observing maturity in motion. You obey because you are unwavering, and that is the true mark of someone who has passed the final test. Number 8, God stops rearranging circumstances and starts observing character. At the beginning of your journey, life often feels like a series of nudges, coincidences, and almost miraculous alignments. Doors open just in time. Problems get solved in ways that feel too perfect to be chance. God seems to be rearranging circumstances constantly, making sure you stay on track. But passing the final test changes the dynamic. Suddenly, those orchestrated moments become rarer. Life no longer bends around you, and the constant guidance you relied on feels absent. This is not abandonment. It is a deliberate shift. God is no longer shaping your path externally. He is observing the character you have built internally. This stage is unsettling because the world appears less forgiving. You're left to navigate choices without intervention. The people around you may behave unpredictably. Opportunities may come or go without warning. The outcomes of your actions now reflect your maturity and wisdom, not divine manipulation. It's no longer about being guided out of trouble. It's about whether you can stand firm when the rules of the game are unchanged and unpredictable. God's focus here is on consistency. Can you maintain integrity when life doesn't conform to your expectations? Can you act with patience when shortcuts and instant gratifications tempt you? Can you lead, influence, and make decisions even when no one else notices or applauds? The circumstances no longer guarantee success. They only reveal what is already within you. This level of testing is merciless but necessary. It strips away reliance on timing, convenience, and support systems that were previously part of your spiritual training. What remains is raw character, tested, exposed, and resilient. The silence of guidance is intentional. It forces you to demonstrate the principles you've internalized, the strength you've built, and the wisdom you've acquired. Passing this stage is transformative. You realize that real maturity is not about being steered, but about steering yourself. God no longer rearranges your life because it is no longer needed. Your character has become the compass, and the final test is simply confirming that the compass points true, even when the winds are strongest. Number 9, you are no longer spared from loneliness, because solitude no longer destabilizes you. At some point, life stops cushioning you with constant presence and distraction. The noise fades. Friends, mentors, and familiar comforts may drift away, leaving you with space that feels heavier than ever. For many, this stage feels like abandonment, as though the world is conspiring to leave you alone. But this is exactly the point. God no longer shields you from isolation, because you have reached a level where solitude is no longer a threat. It's a tool. Earlier in life, loneliness can feel dangerous. It exposes insecurities, amplifies fear, and tests patience in ways you're not ready to handle. That's why God often surrounds you with guidance, comfort, and connection early on. but passing the final test requires you to carry yourself. Solitude becomes a proving ground. It tests whether your faith, purpose, and inner stability are genuine or conditional. Can you remain grounded when no one is cheering for you? Can you continue forward when silence is the only answer to your prayers? Can you hold your convictions even when companionship, validation, and easy comfort are absent? This stage strips away dependence on others for emotional balance. You learn to anchor yourself in truth, in principles, and in internal discipline. The loneliness is heavy, but it is also clarifying. It forces you to confront your own mind, to take responsibility for your own peace, and to trust that you are enough even when no one else notices. There is also an unexpected freedom in this kind of solitude. Without the constant input and influence of others, you start to hear yourself clearly. You begin to recognize patterns, motives, and decisions that you previously overlooked. You develop a kind of inner resilience that cannot be taught, only earned. God's silence in this phase is not neglect, it is trust. You are no longer destabilized by being alone because you have been refined to stand independently. Solitude becomes a sign that you have passed the test, a confirmation that your faith, focus, and character no longer require constant external support to endure and to thrive. Number 10, God trusts your restraint more than your passion. Passion is loud. It grabs attention, drives action, and can make people believe you are unstoppable. Early in your journey, passion is necessary. It fuels movement, inspires courage, and gets you through moments of doubt. But it is volatile. Passion without control can burn bridges, misfire opportunities, and cloud judgment. That's why, at the final stage, God stops being impressed by raw energy and starts watching restraint. Your ability to hold back, to measure your response, and to act with precision becomes the true test of maturity. Restraint is not weakness. It is the quiet power to choose long-term gain over short-term satisfaction. It's the discipline to speak carefully when anger or excitement threatens to dominate. It's the patience to wait when everyone else is rushing, and the clarity to act when most would react blindly. God allows your passion to exist, but He no longer lets it drive the narrative. Your restraint becomes the compass that directs your life, showing that you can handle influence, responsibility, and impact without being carried away by impulse. This stage exposes who you are when no one else is watching. You may feel tempted to explode in energy, to show force, to prove intensity. But God's interest is not in how fiery you are, it's in how steady you remain. Can you maintain balance when life is provocative, when emotions are raw, when the stakes are high? Can you act decisively without letting desire dictate decisions? That is what matters now. There is also a subtle beauty in restraint. It draws trust, respect, and authority naturally. People notice consistency over flash. Actions that are measured carry weight because they are intentional, not impulsive. The world begins to follow the pattern you set, not the noise you make. Passing this test means God can trust you with influence, with leadership, and with outcomes that matter, because you no longer need to be guided by passion alone. Your restraint signals mastery, internal strength, and readiness. It is quiet, unassuming, yet more powerful than the fire of anyone who only knows intensity without control. Number 11, heaven reacts by withholding urgency. At the beginning of your journey, divine intervention often feels immediate. Doors open just in time, warnings arrive just before disaster, and solutions appear faster than logic would allow. Urgency is built into the process because you are still learning the rhythm of life and the weight of your choices. But passing the final test changes everything. Suddenly, urgency disappears. Nothing is rushed. Nothing presses you with artificial deadlines. God steps back, not because he is absent, but because your timing is now trusted. This shift is startling. You expect signs, signals, and immediate responses. You're used to quick corrections, fast lessons, and instant confirmations. But when urgency is withheld, you are left to operate in real time, relying on discernment rather than momentum. God wants to see whether you can maintain patience, persistence, and clarity when pressure is absent. Can you act decisively without the adrenaline of immediacy? Can you remain steady when results are delayed and outcomes unclear? This is the essence of the final test. Withholding urgency also forces independence. You can no longer rely on external prompts to push you forward. Every step requires internal motivation. Every choice must be weighed and measured. You discover that growth and action cannot always wait for signals or signs. They must originate from your own discipline and judgment. Interestingly, the absence of urgency sharpens perception. When life slows, you notice details, anticipate outcomes, and understand the consequences of your actions more clearly. You stop reacting blindly to crises and start responding with intention. Your timing becomes controlled by insight, not external pressure. Passing this test transforms your relationship with action. You no longer chase life, and life no longer pushes you indiscriminately. Heaven's silence is deliberate. It is trust in your ability to move with wisdom, not haste. You act because you are ready, not because you are pressured. The lack of urgency signals mastery over impulse, readiness for responsibility, and proof that the final test has been passed. Number 12. You are allowed to walk into rooms without divine interference. Early in your journey, God often seems to guide your steps directly. You feel nudges, receive signs, and see circumstances align almost perfectly to protect or direct you. That presence is constant, reassuring, and sometimes unavoidable, but passing the final test brings a profound shift. Suddenly you are allowed to walk into spaces, literal or metaphorical, without divine interference. The doors are no longer held open for you. The path is no longer cleared. You are trusted to navigate the environment, influence outcomes, and make choices entirely on your own. This stage is intimidating because it exposes your readiness. It's one thing to act with guidance. It's another to act with freedom and bear the weight of responsibility. Heaven steps back because it no longer needs to manipulate circumstances. Your discernment, integrity, and judgment have become the instruments that govern your path. God observes quietly, watching to see whether what has been built internally translates into reality without divine crutches. Walking into rooms alone tests confidence and courage. Missteps are no longer cushioned by intervention. Misunderstandings are no longer quickly clarified. Opportunities are no longer prearranged. Every action, every choice, every impression you make in these spaces reflects who you are, not who God has made you appear to be. This is the ultimate measure of character, whether influence is wielded responsibly, wisely, and intentionally, without relying on miracles or intervention. There is a subtle power in this independence. When you act without interference, your decisions carry authenticity. People respond to you because of who you are, not because of external favor. Authority becomes natural, not borrowed. Impact becomes a reflection of wisdom, not chance. Passing this stage is transformative. It proves you can lead, influence, and navigate complexity without guidance at every step. God's reaction is quiet confidence, not dramatic applause. You are allowed into these rooms because you are no longer a follower of circumstance. You are a sovereign presence, trusted to act with integrity, clarity, and self-mastery. Number 13, God lets you feel the weight of influence before granting visibility. There comes a point in your journey when impact is tested before recognition. God allows you to carry responsibility, influence decisions, and bear consequences long before the world ever notices. This isn't punishment, it's preparation. Influence without wisdom can destroy more than it builds. That's why visibility, applause, and recognition are delayed. God wants to see if you can handle what matters most before anyone else acknowledges it. Carrying influence in silence is heavy. You begin to realize that your decisions affect more than yourself. People's lives, opportunities, and even environments respond to your choices, often without them realizing it. The weight is real, and mistakes can ripple further than before. Yet there's no spotlight, no validation, no immediate reward. You operate in obscurity, learning that your responsibility is not contingent on acknowledgement, but on principle. This phase teaches discipline, restraint, and integrity in the truest sense. You learn to prioritize the right action over the popular action. You realize that leadership is not about being seen, but about being dependable, wise, and consistent when no one is looking. God's silence here is deliberate. He's testing whether your character has matured enough to bear influence without relying on the validation of recognition. The process is humbling. It forces you to confront pride, impatience, and the temptation to perform. You discover whether your heart is aligned with purpose or merely with appearance. Influence is heavy when carried responsibly, and learning to bear it quietly becomes a rare skill. Passing this test transforms your approach to life. When visibility finally arrives, it isn't validation, it's confirmation. You are prepared, steady, and capable of handling the weight without being swayed by applause or attention. God's reaction in this phase is subtle but profound. By allowing you to feel influence before recognition, He ensures that when the world sees your power, it meets wisdom, integrity, and strength. You are no longer just capable, you are prepared, and that is the hallmark of passing the final test. Number 14. The final test ends when you stop asking if you passed. There is a moment in life when the need for confirmation quietly disappears. You stop looking for signs, validation, or approval from God, people, or circumstances. The constant questioning, did I do enough? Am I ready? Is this right? Fades because you've reached a level where confidence is internal, not external. This is the final stage of the ultimate test. It isn't marked by fanfare or declaration. It is marked by certainty that doesn't need affirmation. Earlier on, reassurance is necessary. You rely on signs, feedback, and results to measure your progress. You look outward because your internal compass is still developing. But passing the final test changes that dynamic. You begin to act, choose, and lead from a place of quiet authority. Your decisions are grounded not in hope or fear, but in clarity and understanding. You no longer seek applause or confirmation because the truth of your readiness is self-evident in your actions. This stage is liberating but also quietly intimidating. It requires full ownership of your growth, your choices, and your impact. There are no reminders, no interventions, and no subtle nudges. God's silence is absolute, but it is not neglect. It is trust, the ultimate recognition that your character, discipline, and discernment are sufficient to navigate life's complexities. You have been tested in every way: patience, restraint, responsibility, solitude, and influence. Now there is no external scoreboard because the score has already been earned internally. Reaching this point reshapes your relationship with faith, purpose, and leadership. You no longer measure your life against outcomes, opinions, or fleeting success. You operate from certainty and principle. You move with calm authority because your internal foundation has been refined through struggle, resistance, and self-mastery. Passing this test is quiet but undeniable. God's reaction is not applause. It is the ultimate nod of confidence. You no longer need to ask if you passed because your life, your character, and your unwavering decisions prove it. The moment is subtle yet profound. You are trusted completely, and the final test is over. Conclusion. Passing the final test is not about fireworks, grand signs, or dramatic displays. It's about transformation, quiet, internal, and undeniable. It's the point where you no longer need correction because you correct yourself, no longer need validation because your actions prove your integrity, and no longer need guidance because your character has become your compass. God's silence, the seeming absence of intervention, and the weight of responsibility are not punishments, they are confirmations. Every challenge, every moment of resistance, every period of solitude was preparing you to operate independently, to influence wisely, and to carry the consequences of your choices without hesitation. This journey reshapes how you relate to the world, to others, and most importantly, to yourself. You've been trained to act with restraint, to remain steady when misunderstood, to lead without applause, and to bear influence before recognition. You've learned that true growth is internal, that real power is disciplined, and that ultimate trust is earned, not given. God's reaction at this stage is subtle but profound. He steps back, watches, and allows you to stand fully on your own. That is the mark of one who has truly passed the final test, the chosen one who no longer seeks approval, no longer relies on signs, and no longer fears consequence, because strength, wisdom, and character now define every move. Your life now carries a quiet authority. Every decision, every choice, and every action resonates with maturity. The journey wasn't about reaching a destination. It was about becoming the person capable of holding the weight of life itself. You have passed, and the world is now ready to see the results of the character God has patiently refined. If this message resonated with you and gave you insight into your journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deep, transformative content. Like, comment, and share this video with anyone who's ready to understand the weight of being chosen. Your growth matters, and your influence can inspire others to rise to their own final test. Stay awakened, chosen ones.